Otto, okay, we will just quickly start, the session from my side, and then
Sure.
I will pass it over to Nishta, and Nishta will pass it over to Otto, if that's okay.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
Ma'am, we are live now.
All right, great. Good morning, everybody. Those who are here in Zoom with us, thank you for making your time to join this session. Appreciate your time. And those who are watching us here in Facebook Live, thank you again for joining us. Hope all of you are doing well and safe. My name is Sunita Basnit, Head of School of Business at the British College. I am delighted to be part of this session in the role of host, along with my colleague, Ms. Nisha Rajbandari. Before I start, very basic housekeeping rules. Please turn off your camera and mic throughout the event, those who are here with us in Zoom session, except me, Nishta, and Odo, of course. Anyone who would like to ask questions, please drop your questions in chat so that we can pick it up later after 9 a.m. For Odo. And please keep your phone in silent mode as much as possible. So today, as a part of TBC Distinguished Guest Lecture Series 2, we have an amazing and super cool speaker with us, Mr. Otto Dargan. Otto Dargan is the founder of Home Loan Experts, a fintech company in Australia that helps people to apply mortgages with banks. The business grew from a home business in 2006 to become #1 specialist mortgage broker in Australia, lending out over 5 billion Australian dollar. Otto's passion for real estate, investing, and financial services has compelled him to create a business with a strong service focus that's often lacking from the services offered by other brokers and the major banks. Home Loan Experts has a sister company in Kathmandu, Nepal, with over 400 staff, goes by the name HLE Nepal, and it's a business process outsourcing company that specializes in working for Australia and global mortgage industry. Their primary client and the owner is Home Loan Experts itself. So with the growing number of staff in Nepal office, we are assuming that the strategy of people management has changed over the years since its inception year for the Otto and the management itself. So it will be interesting to hear Otto's experience on this topic along with a wide range of examples. So I'll now pass mic to Nishta for her introduction and to start the session. Nishta, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sunita. I am very glad to be here today. I would like to wish everyone a good morning and also a warm welcome from my side. Brief introduction, my name is Nisha Rajbandari and I am currently the program leader for the postgraduate business and management program here at TBC. And of course, would like to welcome Mr. Otto Dargan again on behalf of the British College as well. I'm very much looking forward to our insightful discussion today. Our topic is developing cultural intelligence, also known as cultural quotient or CQ in short. We are in this day and age where more and more people are having to work with or interact with each other in a cross-cultural setting, and therefore developing cultural intelligence and understanding cultural nuances for effective management, strategic leadership, or relationship management has become more relevant than ever. When we talk about managing diversity in general, even in our classes, we generally focus a lot on understanding the key differences. However, when we talk about cultural intelligence, it goes way beyond that. It is about using emotional intelligence as well and being able to culturally adapt to work effectively. And we'll be discussing a lot on this today as well. So without further ado, I would like to pass on the baton to Mr. Otto Dargan here for his presentation. But again, quick reminder, we will be having a Q&A session at the end. So if you'd like to post any questions, you can post it in the chat in the Zoom or in Facebook comments as well. So now let's pass on to Mr. Otto without waiting further, and let's get our discussion started. Over to you, Otto.
Thank you, Nishta, and thank you, Sunita. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've had a long connection with Nepal now for 10 years, I think, that we've been doing business in Nepal. And for me, it's been an amazing journey. Firstly, because I love Nepalese people and I love Nepalese culture. But I've really enjoyed, I guess, seeing underneath the surface and seeing how things really work and how people really think. And as I've traveled to many countries around the world, this has become a topic that I find very interesting because everyone across the world thinks in different ways and has different beliefs. And that has enabled me to grow and see the world differently. And I hope that's what I can help you with today. So what are we going to go through? So we're going to go through a little bit about who we are, Homeland Experts, why cultural intelligence is so important. We're going to compare Nepalese culture to Western culture. We're going to talk about how you can succeed. And we're going to go through some examples and case studies, which I want to be a bit interactive. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and then you can ask me some questions as well. So who are we? So just very quickly, I started Homeland Experts from my living room in 2006. So I was 23 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. We are mortgage brokers. So what that means is that we're an outsourced bank manager. So think of it as like we're a bank manager for 30 banks instead of just one. So someone can come to us and we can get them a mortgage from any lender. Now, a lot has changed since 2006. From the outside, we look like a mortgage broking business, but we've actually got three main businesses. So mortgage broking, outsourcing for other mortgage brokers. So our competitors are also our customers, and also technology as well. So we work with all the major banks in Australia, as well as non-bank lenders. And we now have over 400 staff, most of which are in Nepal. We grew organically, so we never had any venture capital and we didn't have any debt. So it's just simply because there's a lot of demand for what we do. Last year, we were named the best large brokerage in Australia, and we won the biggest award in Australia for a brokerage, which is Australian Brokerage of the Year, which is the winner out of all of the categories of awards. So effectively, we're #1 in Australia, and that's something that we're very proud of. We're a social business. We believe the world should be a better place because we existed. So we want customers, banks, and our team to all win just as much as we do. So we support several charities in Nepal with a focus on children's education. And our goal is to donate at least $1 million over 10 years to charities in Nepal. So we're for profit and for purpose. So why is cultural intelligence so important? Well, you probably grew up in Nepal. I'm going to assume most of you did. And you are adapted to think like a Nepalese person and behave in a way that works in Nepal. I grew up in Australia. I think like an Australian, and my behavior works well in Australia. But this is a problem. This is just one way of thinking. And when we work with different cultures, we need to understand how they work and we need to adapt. So when you look at me, you only see the tip of the iceberg. And the same is true when I look at you. So we see only a little bit about who a person is. And the problem is that we project. So we assume that what's beneath the water is the same for you and me. But of course, we're very different. So this is a big mistake that we all make. Honestly, I have no idea what you believe, what you're good at, and what your dreams are. So I kind of fill in the gaps by just thinking you're the same as me. In a company, there's something similar. We only see part of what's really happening. When a company has 2 or more cultures in it working together, then often it's like the iceberg has a crack in the bottom of it. We agree on the things above the water, but for everything else, we assume we agree, but often we don't. And this can cause a company with many cultures to struggle to get everyone working together effectively. We look at similar things, but we see something completely different. I remember my team took me to a restaurant in Saltimode called Swastik Foodland, and I was horrified. In the Western world, we don't know what a swastik is, but we absolutely know what a swastika is. And it is the most hated, evil symbol in all of Western culture. So to go into a restaurant and see them everywhere, I was shocked. So looking at the image on the right, I feel fear, hatred, and disgust. The people who use this symbol were the cause the death of 50 million people. So I learned from this and I realized that I needed to work on my cultural intelligence because clearly I wasn't seeing things the way they were meant to be seen. If you can think like a citizen of the world rather than like a Nepalese person, then you are much smarter. This is about diversity of thought. You can get diversity of thought by talking to others, or you can get diversity of thought by learning new things yourself. You can see things in many different ways and adapt your behavior to suit the situation. This makes you incredibly valuable to an employer. If you work for a Western company and you think and behave like a Nepalese person, then at best, your career is very limited. You aren't doing what they expect you to do, and you don't even realize that something is wrong. So you'll probably feel frustrated as well. At worst, you could be fired. Don't worry, if I worked for a Nepalese company or Nepalese government, I think I would get fired within the first hour. When you understand our culture, you'll see why I would get fired. Cultural intelligence is great for your career, but let's zoom out for a second. Let's look at Nepal as a country. So looking at this picture, you may feel like you're working hard, you're running to improve your life, get a good job, get a degree. And yet someone who isn't as smart as you just gets dropped in a good job and doesn't have to work for it. There are several things about Nepalese culture that make it really hard to stop nepotism and corruption. And if Nepal is going to move forward, then some aspects of Nepalese culture need to change. You and I can't change the government of Nepal. We can't count on them to make things better. You are the future leaders of Nepal. If Nepal is going to move forward, it's really up to you and it's up to businesses. It begins with what's inside your head. It begins with what you believe and your actions. And as we go through this talk, I want you to think about what aspects of Nepalese culture make it easy for corruption to grow. A few words of caution. This talk is a generalization. So you may be different, okay? Not every person is the same. And there's no right or wrong or best culture. Really what it is, it's about what behavior is right for what situation and what actions and beliefs will get what result. We all love our own culture as well. So it's very hard to criticize it. And we all have to fit in with our culture, right? I'm sure many of you think quite differently to how your grandparents think or how people in the countryside think, but you have to behave in certain ways in order to fit in. Understand that I love Nepalese culture. What I say may feel harsh, but understand that Australians say what they think. That's one of the differences in our culture. And it is tough love because it is only by facing the truth as it is that society can move forward. Really what I want to see is a better Nepal, and I really want to see all of you have great careers. So let's compare Nepalese and Western culture. Here's what we did. We used a framework called from a book called The Culture Map, and I believe at the British College you use a different framework, which this is good because this is going to give you a different perspective. So we interviewed around 30 people. They were either Nepalese people living in Australia or Australians who had worked with Nepal a lot, or Nepalese who had worked with Australia a lot, or Nepalese businessmen who work overseas or internationally. We're focusing on comparing Nepalese culture to Australian culture. However, most of what we say is true for comparing Asian culture to Western culture. There's a lot of similarities. So we'll be talking about 8 different cultural dimensions. What's incredible is that Nepal and Australia are exact opposites on all 8. We are totally different. So we're going to go through communication, persuading, trust, evaluating, disagreeing, deciding, leading, and scheduling. So if you eat a strawberry on its own, and it's kind of nice, right? If you have some cream on its own, then that's okay too. But if you put them together, it's something delicious, right? That's how I kind of see Australian and Nepalese culture. It's a match made in heaven. We have nothing in common, but we work so well together. We bring together different strengths and create something beautiful. It's something that I had no idea about when I started operating in Nepal, but it's something that I discovered very quickly. So let's talk about communicating. So when we talk about communicating, societies, it's more like a continuum, right? So there's no black and white, it's all shades of gray. And different countries are in different spots on this continuum. So a low context culture means people are very direct. They say what they mean, they're very precise. And this can also come across sometimes as rude because it's so direct. Whereas a high context culture, people tend to not say what they mean. They tend to beat around the bush. They tend to hint at things. And also a high context culture can maybe a lot harder to understand if you're not from a high context culture. I've been to Japan, and I can tell you now, if you were not born in Japan, you will not understand Japan. You could have lived there for 10, 20 years, you will still not understand Japan. It's a totally different world. So when we look at Nepal, Nepal is likely somewhere around where India is on the communication spectrum. So we're quite different, Australia and Nepal. When we talk about Nepali communication, it's generally very polite and friendly. I think Nepalese people are known as, when I talk to people from all over the world and I ask them what do they think of Nepalese people, the first thing they say is Nepalese people are the nicest people in the world. I met one person the other day who didn't say that. He said people from Peru were the nicest people in the world and Nepalese were the second nicest. And I said, where are you from? He says, I'm from Peru. And I'm like, okay. All right. So communication also changes with hierarchy in Nepal. So if you are an employee, you're going to talk very differently to if you're a boss. And swearing is considered extremely disrespectful in Nepali. In Australia, we are clear and direct on, and we want to hear what everyone thinks. So we often will give brutal feedback in a group meeting, right? Or if you talk about this talk I'm giving now, I think it'd be very hard for a Nepalese person to communicate some of the things I'm saying. We have flat communication. So what that means is that as the owner of the business, I will go and talk to anyone in the business and I will treat them exactly the same. And I will listen to anyone in the business. So it basically, the organization chart is completely meaningless when it comes to communication. And in Australia, we swear a lot. I think we swear probably one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to swearing. And that's probably something that we could improve upon when we're working internationally. So what does it mean? Nepalese people are focusing on group harmony. They want everyone to get along. But often it means that people don't speak at all. And that's because it's safer for them to not speak. Whereas Australians focus on making sure everyone can understand. So it can appear rude, but people are more likely to be heard and employees will say what they think. Something about persuading. Generally, people in Nepal like to know the theory. So that's principles first. And they also like to use storytelling a lot. Australians want to know, how can we use something? So don't teach me something if I cannot use it. Australians are less interested in the theory. This is important, by the way, if you're going to be selling in a country outside of Nepal. If your customers are overseas, you need to sell in a way that they will resonate with. So in Nepal, people care a lot about what other people will say and think. So people are not very outspoken. While communicating, people prefer to understand people's psychology, and they building relationships, because relationships and hierarchy is a big part of persuading. In Australia, we believe we can get straight to the point and not beat around the bush. So we talk about facts and figures and we give examples. So we say, if we do X, then Y will happen, and then everyone is happy. And we use logic, and we talk about practicality, and we talk about results. So that's generally what persuades us. So in Nepal, it's often the source of information is usually a bit blurry, and people cannot seem to present evidence. When confronted, they say, I heard it from someone else. Falano le Baneko, I think. In Australia, people are detail orientated. So we like data. So you show me the evidence, right? So what does it mean? In Nepal, people use relationships to persuade. And so hierarchy matters. Facts, figures, and data is often not used. Whereas Australia is focusing on results. How can we use this? And is there any evidence to support what you're saying? In Nepal, people are very trusting. Trust is based on relationship. So if you want to do business with someone, you need to get to know them first. In Australia, trust works differently, and I'll get to that in a second. So Nepalese people are more loyal, and they're very helpful to anyone in need. They're quite good in making close and long-term relationships with friends and colleagues. In Nepal, personal and professional relationships are often mixed. So most people are really good friends with their work colleagues and outside of work as well. So if there are any disagreements at work, this can affect their social life as well. So again, you can see why group harmony is so important in Nepal. Whereas in Australia, the personal and professional life is often quite separate. So things that happened at office often stay in the office. And the culture of Nepal is to rely on the support of others. So your family will help you if you're sick or you're unemployed. In Australia, the government fills the role of the family. So we are less reliant on relationships. So if we're unemployed, we will go to the government for help. If we're sick, we go to the government hospital. And you'll find this in most Western countries, that the government is taking over the role of the family. So it means also that Nepalese people can take things personally. So if there's a work dispute, it will affect them personally and it will affect the relationship. So it's because relationships, trust, work, and communication are all connected in Nepal. Nepotism and favoritism can spoil the environment in Nepal. So Australians barely even understand the concept of nepotism. Nepotism is an English word, but believe it or not, I had actually never heard this word before until I came to Nepal. I actually had a Nepalese person use the word, and I had to ask them, what does this word mean? Because I'd never heard it. So it's quite a different society. In Australia, there is very little nepotism because trust is not based on relationships. So in Nepal, there's often, because relationships are the basis for trust, it can be quite easy for someone to take advantage of other people's trusts because they have the relationship and then they can take advantage. And so that's something to be cautious with. Nepalese people are afraid that not trusting will damage the relationship. And there's also, because it's a very relationship-based society, there can be the risk of gossip and rumors, which can also destroy trust. In Western countries, I said it works quite differently. Here's actually, I know that you're all smart students, so I put in an equation. So credibility, do I believe you? Reliability, are you competent? Okay, can you do the job? Or can you do what you say? And will you do what you say? Will you be on time? And intimacy, this is the relationship part. So it matters for us too, but it matters much less than in Nepal. And then this is divided by self-interest. So are you here to help me or to hurt me? Do you care just about yourself? So you can see the amount of self-interest has a big impact, right? But as well as that, how reliable they are, credible, and how close I am to them. And so this is how trust works. What does it mean? Nepalese people, trust is based on the relationship. Australians trust on your ability to deliver results, and that help both of us usually. Evaluating. So this is about how you give feedback to other people. So it's no surprise that Australia is a bit more direct. It's likely that Nepal is around India somewhere, because people tend to avoid giving negative feedback in Nepal. So in Nepal, we tend to be subtle and gentle while providing feedback. There's a lot of beating around the bush, and Nepali people are not accustomed to using feedback productively. And so often people will get defensive, and it can damage the relationship. Australians tend to provide direct, logical feedback, and we try and be very honest. The problem is honesty sometimes hurts, right? And so often, particularly if we're dealing with other cultures, it's very easy for us to hurt their feelings. What it's really about is that, and this is a theme through the whole talk, is that Nepalese people are all about prioritizing relationships, whereas Australians are focused on being honest and accurate. It's not to say Australians don't value relationships, and it's not to say that Nepalese people are not honest. That's not true. It's about priorities. Disagreement. So confrontational is where in some countries it's not uncommon for people to be screaming at each other in a group meeting. I've been in meetings with people from Israel, and it's unbelievable the way that they're dealing with each other. But what's interesting is it doesn't damage the relationship. They talk like that, they're screaming at each other, and then they go out for lunch, and as if nothing happened. Whereas in other cultures, people avoid confrontation, and this is definitely the case in Nepal. So group harmony is extremely important for Nepalese people, and so people try to be diplomatic and avoid fights as much as possible. Whereas so Nepalese people will have less confrontation, more conversation. So also people have the need to feel that like they're correct. So one thing I found very interesting about Nepal is that if you disagree with someone, it means that you're no longer on their team, right? And it can mean that they're now out to get you, right? So I understand why people are afraid to disagree, because it's dangerous. In Australia, different opinions are welcomed, irrespective of your age and your position. So people are comfortable engaging in discussions. Disagreement is expected, and it doesn't change the relationship, even if it's an argument. So we look at it as kind of like, I'll put out an idea, someone else will put out an idea, and then we attack each other's ideas and our own ideas, and whichever idea survives is probably the best idea. So we see it as we finish the ideas together and we're deciding together. But if someone's not used to this, then they may feel like they're attached to their idea, and in which case an attack on their idea is considered an attack on them. And so that may be considered rude and direct. In any culture, it's difficult to disagree with someone about something that is ideological, okay? So logical and ideological are two different ways of thinking. So politics, religion are best avoided in almost every culture. It doesn't matter how direct a culture is, it's best to avoid them. And talking about sex, it depends on the culture. In Germany, no problem. Australia, it's okay. The US and UK, best to avoid the topic. So basically, if it's ideological rather than logical, it's better to listen rather than to talk. Really smart people and emotionally mature people, they learn to listen to people who have different ideologies to them, because they understand that they may be wrong and they want to listen to people who disagree with them. So Nepalese people focus on maintaining the relationship. So it's better to be silent rather than to disagree. If they can see a problem, they may not speak up. And disagreement often means war, whereas Australians focus on trying to find the right answer together. If you disagree with me, you're still my friend. And we actually, this is a big thing, is that we have very little respect for yes people. Yes people is a term given to someone who just agrees with everything you say. We see that as, I guess, playing favorites, and we see it as that person is playing too safe and is not adding value to the group. So we don't like that at all. And so this is interesting in that what is correct in Nepalese culture will actually lose respect in Australian culture. And I just want to point out that emotional maturity plays a big role here. So if you have an Australian manager who has the emotional maturity of a teenager, then you probably don't want to disagree with them. It's dangerous, right? Whereas if you have a Nepalese manager who's very emotionally mature, they're likely to listen to you and hear you. So it's not just about culture. Making decisions. So some cultures like to make decisions as a group, and in others, the boss makes the decisions. So in Nepal, the decisions flow from top to bottom. The boss makes the decisions, and as an employee, you just do the work and you don't argue with the boss if you don't like the decision. While in Australia, it's situational. So we usually make decisions in a collaborative way. We all say what we can see, and then we make the decision. Sometimes, though, the boss will make the decision. So it does vary a little bit. In Nepal, decisions are often based on emotions, whereas in Australia, decisions, we try to make them based on facts and data. What does it mean? It means hierarchy matters for Nepalese people a lot. The boss makes the decision, the employee doesn't argue with it, and the reason is because it's too risky for the employee to argue with it. In Australia, we focus on making the best decisions. So more people means better decisions. However, collaboration can be slow, chaotic, and honestly, it can be quite frustrating at times. So people also in Australia, they don't necessarily do what they're told because the hierarchy doesn't matter. We're a flat society, okay? And so you need to convince people to do their job, which is something a little bit unusual if you come from a Nepalese background. But it's quite often that in the past that I would ask an Australian staff member, why didn't you do this? And they say, oh, I didn't want to. I'm like, what? Right? You would never hear that from a Nepalese person. So which decision making is best? Well, it comes down to the situation. If you're in a crisis, then top-down decision making is best. Okay, because you need a fast decision made. If the building is on fire, don't sit around and hold a meeting. Someone needs to say, everyone get out now. It's why militaries always have a hierarchy. It doesn't matter what culture they're in. There are ranks and you must obey everyone above you. It's because the military has a lot of crises. Whereas for a complex decision, collaborative is best because usually no one can see every piece of the puzzle and no one has all the knowledge required. Modern militaries are learning from this. And so what we find is that the Australian military, the US military, they use hierarchical for giving orders. However, for planning, they use collaborative. So they're evolving. Leading. For most of these cultural dimensions, the UK, Australia, and the USA are very similar. However, for leading, this is not the case. You'll find that the UK and USA are halfway between Australia and Nepal. So Australia is very far on the left. So we're closer to the Scandinavian countries, in that we're very egalitarian. What that means is that we try to make our society very equal. Whereas in Nepal, society is hierarchical. So people who are older than you need to be respected. People that are higher up the organization chart need to be respected. The UK and US, it's a little bit strange to me as an Australian, but you'll see some people behave in a hierarchical way and some people in an egalitarian way. So in Nepal, there's the culture of respecting the boss. The boss is always right. To me, this is really weird. I'm not used to being called sir. And when I come to our office in Nepal, the security guard salutes me when I show up to work, and that's very strange to me, okay? Whereas people experience and qualifications also matter a lot in Nepalese culture, whereas Australians are really focused on can you do the job rather than what qualifications you have. So in Australia, respect is more based on what you can do rather than what position you are in. In Australia, it's also based on your values. So we're looking at who are you, and that determines my level of respect for you. So it's not uncommon in an Australian company if the CEO has bad values and isn't doing a great job, that no one respects the CEO. They may have more respect for the office cleaner who is really friendly and is really helpful and is working hard. So that's how respect works in our culture. It's completely different. Russia is a hierarchical society, very hierarchical society. And if you were one of Russia's generals in the army, would you tell Putin that the $100 billion he spent on the army hasn't been effective and that the army is not ready to fight? Well, this is exactly what happened. So this is something that is a challenge for hierarchical societies, is that no one wants to tell the leader the truth. Everyone wants to show the leader that everything is great. Now, since the leader is often the one making the decisions in hierarchical societies, it means that the leader makes really bad decisions. And so this is a big challenge. So let's imagine I run one company and I have open communication and feedback with my team, and a competitor has a hierarchical company and their staff are afraid to speak up. When it comes to a free market economy, they are not going to be able to compete with me. They don't stand a chance. So we have societies with millions of individuals all working together. Small differences in how a society communicates and how people lead and cooperate creates massive differences in the results that society can achieve. So in Western culture, when it comes to leadership, we focus on motivating and inspiring and encouraging everyone is really important. And leaders are easily approachable by anyone. So in Western culture, people respect you for your work, not your title or position. And people are all at the same level. So think of it as the boss is just another person. And so anyone can disagree with the boss and put their opinions forward. Also, in the Western world, anyone can be a leader. Leadership is a behavior, not a title. So again, it's quite different. There is a toxic side to having a flat culture. And that is, in Australia, we have something called tall poppy syndrome. So poppy is a flower. And basically, to sum it up, say someone believes that someone else is better than them, then they may try and cut them down. So spread rumors, any accomplishment they have, they say, oh, that's nothing, that was luck, you had rich parents or whatever, right? And what they're doing is they're trying to ensure that we have a flat society. But this is, in my opinion, a very, very toxic behavior. Whereas in the UK and the USA, people will generally celebrate the success of others and say, what can I learn? So it's very often in Australia, people will hide their success or will be very, very humble. Not all Nepalese leaders act in a hierarchical way. I'm a big fan of Nim's. I think he's not just a Nepalese hero, he's a global inspiration. His leadership is an example of what you want to be like. His team are his brothers, not his staff. You know, he climbed the mountains to show the world and Nepal what Nepalese people are made of, and he inspires others. So I encourage you, if you become a leader, then be like Nims. So what does it mean? In Nepal, leadership is all about hierarchy. So an employee cannot be a leader, and the boss is respected because of their position or title. In Australia, the boss is just another person. Anyone can be a leader. Titles are meaningless, and I respect you for what you can do, not your position or title. A Nepalese person living in Australia said to me, giving respect isn't a problem. It's the expectation of respect that is toxic, which I found really interesting. Keep in mind that as an Australian, when I visit Nepal, generally everyone is nice to me. You know, they treat me as a guest, so they treat me well. And so I very rarely get to see for myself the way that someone high up the hierarchy may treat someone lower down. Scheduling. So this is about time. So in Australia, we like to be on time, and in many other countries, things are very, very flexible. By the way, I've worked with Germans before. They're on the most left of all of this continuum, and Germans are exactly on time. I couldn't believe when I was catching a bus in Germany, there was an electric sign at the bus stop that told you how many seconds until the bus arrived. I could not imagine this as an Australian. That was crazy. And that was in the year 2000. So that was a long time ago. In Nepal, people have flexible time, and it's okay if you're half an hour late to a scheduled appointment. In Australia, the USA and UK, everything is scheduled, and it's best that you're a little bit early if it's something for work. For this talk, I logged on exactly to the minute, okay? So the reason for this is that in Australia, time is money. Whereas in Nepal, people tend not to value other people's time very much. And also life is chaotic in Nepal. You know, there's big traffic jams and you know, all sorts of things that can mess with your day. And so people have to be more flexible. People in Nepal as well, there's very often people do things at the last minute or don't plan projects carefully. Whereas in Australia, people plan ahead of schedule their daily activities, and Australians expect everything to be fast. So think of it this way. If you, a great example is ordering food at a restaurant. If I order food at a restaurant in Australia, when I sit down, I expect the waiter to be at my table within about 30 seconds to give me a menu, and then to come back about 2 minutes later to take my order, and the food to arrive maximum 10 minutes, depends. You know, some restaurants it could take a bit longer, but generally it's all really fast. In Nepal, often I'll sit down at a restaurant and the waiter will see me sit down, and it'll be about 10 minutes before they even give me a menu. And so just generally things take a lot longer. So generally in Nepal, people are flexible with time, and in Australia, we are busy, so we want our time respected. This is something very interesting. So if I have a friend in Australia that's unreliable and is often late, I actually cut them off. They're no longer my friend. And that's because I'm busy. And if they, to me, that's a huge sign of disrespect. If they were to swear at me, that's okay. But if they're late, they're gone. So it's a bit of a different way of thinking. So I encourage you, if you're working with British people, they're the same. They expect everything on time. And so it's very important that you're on time all the time. So let's look outside. So we've gone through the 8 cultural dimensions. Let's look at some things that are not covered by the 8 cultural dimensions. So here's the thing. 100 years ago in Nepal, Nepal was not that connected to the rest of the world. It was really cut off. Your grandparents and great-grandparents lived in a very different world. And things changed. The world has become a global village. So Nepalese people now have to compete with other countries. Anything you manufacture, anything you grow, has to be sold in competition with products and services from other countries. So many of you as well will go and work for foreign companies or will move overseas. And so I hate to say it, but you do not have a choice. You must adapt. And it is the countries that adapt the best to globalization that will do the best. Nobody can stop globalization. It's impossible. And Australia, we have to adapt as well because our culture is not perfect for working with China or working with the US. When I look at Nepalese culture, what I see is that there's a lot of expectations on Nepalese people. And expectations, my meditation teacher said, are like a cage built around us. In Nepal, you're expected to study, you're expected to get married, you're expected to behave in certain ways. And if you're a woman, there's even more expectations. If you don't do what's expected of you, then there is harsh judgment from society. I see that many people living in Nepal are struggling with this, and they know that they are not the person they are presenting to the world. Often I feel like I'm meeting someone's representative rather than the real person underneath. And in Australia, it's common for teenagers to rebel against their parents. And this is a very difficult time for both the teenagers and the parents, but it's part of growing up. And it helps the teenagers to learn boundaries, so what behavior is acceptable and unacceptable, and for them to learn who they are. What I see in Nepal is that many people never rebel. And as a result of this, many people may not be sure who they really are. You only know what society has told you to be. You don't know who you are. I don't know the solution to this. And I know that for many people, it's not a problem. But I know for many others, it is a problem. And all I want to say is I'm sorry that you have to go through that. Sometimes I find a huge problem in my business. Usually the problem is created in one department, but the symptoms of that problem show up in a different department. And it would be like the admissions team for a college bringing in students who were not capable, and then the professors struggling to teach, right? It's not the professor's fault. They didn't do anything wrong. But when I asked the team what's happening, it seems everyone was aware of the problem, but nobody talked to the manager that can solve the problem, the department where the problem was occurring. And as an Australian, I find this really strange because for us, the organization chart doesn't matter. We'll just go and talk to anyone. But in Nepal, people see communication to a manager that doesn't report to them as risky. It's safer to just stay silent. They see it as it's not their job to talk about a problem in another area. If they actually do go and speak to that manager, then will that manager listen to them? Because they aren't their boss. So this creates massive problems. And I'm sure you can see this all through the government of Nepal and all big organizations. One day you may become a manager. And I encourage you, I talked about NIMS, but I encourage you, if you do, to learn the difference between a boss and a leader. If you're working in a Nepalese company, you probably have to behave like a boss. But if you're working in a Western company, you want to behave like a leader. And they're quite different things. One thing that I found very shocking is that if you have a position description for a job and you show it to a Nepalese person and an Australian person, what they believe the responsibilities of the job are will be completely different. And I see that a lot of Nepalese people move overseas, and even though they have a degree and they're really smart and they work hard, they end up doing small jobs like being a delivery driver or working in a restaurant. And personally, I find it's very sad because they could do so much more. But what it is often they've failed to understand the cultural differences. And so they don't switch to the Western way of working. So people in Nepal will often do a job and do it really well. And one thing about Nepal is if people make mistakes, they tend not to discuss them, or they would tend to say, oh, it's not my fault in some way. But if they're given instructions, they will do them. And people try to avoid accountability. So when it comes to avoiding accountability, one of the things is avoiding making decisions. If you make a decision, then you're responsible for that decision. But in Western countries, employees are expected to make decisions, to spot and solve problems, to suggest ways to do things better, to give feedback and disagree. And we expect employees to make mistakes. And what we're looking for is, are they learning from the mistake? What did they learn, right? Everyone makes mistakes. And I can tell you now in my company, I make the biggest ones. So I certainly am not going to get someone in trouble for making a mistake. What will get someone in trouble is if they hide the mistake, or they don't learn from it, or they blame someone else. And the other thing is that Australians, you need to convince them to do their job. So you tell an Australian to do something, they're not necessarily going to do it. And this is one of the reasons why we use collaboration, because we need something called buy-in. If the employee is part of the decision-making process, then they are far more likely to help then implement that decision. In Australia as well, you are accountable for everything underneath you in the org chart. So our CEO is accountable for literally everything. They're accountable for the floors being swept in an office in Nepal. They're accountable for salaries being paid. They're accountable for literally everything in the company. So there is no ability for someone to say, oh, that's a problem because of one of my staff, or that's a problem in another team. It doesn't really work that way. Accountability sticks. So if you're someone who gets results, then working in a Western company is great. If you're someone who's low performing, working in a Western company is probably not a good idea. So basically, in summary, Nepalese employees are expected to do what they are told. In Western countries, employees are expected to effectively act like managers. And this is a big difference. What I see as well is in Nepal, because there's a culture of saving face. So people need to be perceived in a positive way by society. And so it's like they're wearing a mask that they let society see. And it's really hard for Nepalese people to talk about many topics with other Nepalese people. I've heard some of our staff say, I can only talk about this with you. If I tell a Nepalese person, they're going to judge me. Which for me, it's really hard to hear that, because I imagine that a lot of people in Nepal have no one to talk to about serious problems. So in Australia, we talk about our problems all the time. People are very open talking about mental illnesses. They're very open talking about mistakes they've made and problems that they've had, because we're not worried about being judged. And this is called being vulnerable. In our culture, vulnerability shows emotional maturity and courage. So we don't see it as a weakness. we see someone who is vulnerable as extremely strong. So the problem in Nepal I see is that there isn't a safe space to be vulnerable. No one can be vulnerable if they're going to be judged. And so it's not a problem with Nepalese people, it's a problem with there being no safe space. If I was in Nepal and dealing with depression, I wouldn't know what to do. I don't know who I would talk to about it. So I see that there's a lot of hidden suffering in Nepal, outside smiling and inside crying, which is something that hopefully will change over time. And now let's talk about love. So in the Western world, our view of love has been shaped by Hollywood and Disney, and it's wrong. And Western people don't understand arranged marriages. They don't know that love is both partially found and partially grown. It's a mixture of the two. Many of them, people in the West, expect that initial infatuation to last for the whole marriage. And that's not really what happens. It lasts about 2 years. Divorce is higher in the West, and I've heard some people in Nepal say, well, love marriages are not as good because divorce is higher. But I don't think divorce is a good measure of success of marriage. After all, it's not easy to divorce someone if you're in Nepal. So really the measure of success is how many people are married and happy. So I think both Nepal and Australia have a lot to learn from each other when it comes to love, because we both see this in a very different way. People in Western cultures also, they have no idea that they're rich. I hear people say things all the time that to me show they have no idea how easy their life is or how good it is. I heard someone say, I'm not rich because I fly economy class, not business class. And I'm like, you're on a plane, right? That means you're rich, okay? Another one said, rich people are what's wrong with the world. And this is a friend of mine who owns a house in Sydney worth $1 million and has an investment property and earns over $200,000 a year. And you know, it's very hard for me to get through to people like that because their view is ideological. So it doesn't matter that you explain to them that they're rich, they don't get it. And so Australians don't realize that, you know, they have free education, free healthcare, and so many things like, you know, roads that work and a government that works. Just that alone is what makes many Western countries rich. In the West, we have very liberal values. And what that means is that people can do what they want as long as they don't hurt other people. So it means women, homosexuals, many minorities are treated much better. I've heard some really interesting things in Nepal. I heard one person say, we don't have gay people in Nepal. And I said, oh, really? I got curious. I said, okay, why do you say that? And they said, I've never met one. I go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why that is. So about 10% of the population is homosexual. So there's a lot of homosexual people in Nepal. So society with high expectations, judgment, and most importantly, society doesn't understand the pain that these minorities go through. And so their pain is ignored. What happened in the Western cultures is that firstly, women challenged society and said we deserve the right to vote, and they were right. And women had to educate society about the pain that they go through. When their pain was understood by society, then they were an equal in society. There is still some way to go, but massive progress has been made. It was the same for homosexuals. It was about people didn't understand the pain that they go through. And what I see in Nepal is that the older generations often don't understand that their behavior and their beliefs can cause a lot of pain for minorities. So this is a big difference in terms of how people are expected to behave in Nepal versus Australia. And that's something for you to consider. I encourage you, if you, for example, have traditional values about women, then talk to some women and ask them what their experience is like. If you understand their pain, it's hard not to have compassion. Why do people get a degree? In Nepal, I see that the reasons are a bit different. It's needed for most good jobs. Pressure from family, for visas overseas, delaying getting married. I was surprised by that one. And also the respect of having a degree. So often people study, but they don't necessarily, they haven't worked. And so, for example, I'm sure some of you are studying a BBA or an MBA, but if you've never had a job, then you've never had that context that enables you to understand the information fully. In Western cultures, degrees are usually only needed for specialist jobs. So like if you're a doctor, well, I hope you have a degree if you're a doctor, or a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer. But most office jobs and management jobs, you don't need a degree. People study in Australia, they're more focused on learning the skills and they're less focused on getting a piece of paper. The one silly reason that a lot of Australians get a degree is because they don't want to grow up. They want to go to university and get drunk and hang out with their friends and avoid getting a job. So when we hire in Australia, we look at what people can do, not what degree they have. It's actually almost irrelevant when we hire people. And I don't really know what degrees my team has in Nepal. I'm not really that interested, because if they paid attention in that degree and they took it seriously, then I should see that in what they can do. Whereas if they were just studying to get a piece of paper, I don't want to hire them, right? If you learn the history of a country, then you'll understand a lot more about another culture. So Australia was founded when England invaded what they considered to be an uninhabited land in 1788. It was not uninhabited, it was filled with native people. But England had a problem. Their prisons were full. So they had nowhere to put lots of criminals. So what they did is they put all the criminals on boats and they sent them to Sydney. Those prisoners were my ancestors. No wonder Australians hate authority and don't like a boss telling them what to do. No wonder we have tall poppy syndrome. No wonder so many things about our society come from this past that we have. And when you look at the United States, their culture is totally bizarre. Again, if you know their history, you understand why they are this way. When the US was founded, there were two big groups of people that came to America. The first were religious people whose views were too extreme for Europe. And so the Europeans were attacking them. And so they fled to America. And then there were entrepreneurs looking to make a lot of money, who were moved to the South and were growing tobacco and cotton. And they were the ones who had lots of slaves in America. So it's no surprise that Americans hate the government telling them what to do. It's no surprise that freedom has become almost a religion in the United States. And Americans have no idea about the crimes that their country has committed around the world. They know nothing about the army base being built in Nepal. They live in a bubble. So another word for it is an echo chamber. It's where all they can hear are people with the same opinions and who think like they do. And this is a big cause of a lot of the world's problems. So what can Nepal learn from Australian feedback? I think honest feedback and clear communication, but with a Nepalese style to it. You still have to be very kind. And that's something for you to figure out. Learn to say no, but provide a clear logical reason for it. But also, if you're in Nepalese society, I encourage you, you've got to be very cautious with that. but when dealing with Western countries, then say no if something's not going to work. Trust and respect should be performance-based and earned, not based on position. Embracing constructive disagreement. This is really important because you get much better outcomes. In Australia, we say the problem is our enemy, not each other. Focus on making the right decision. Consider respecting the time of others. Study to learn, not to get a degree. Be accountable for anything you're working on. Have high standards and constantly improve. There are a lot of things not to copy from Western culture. Something that breaks my heart is to see Nepalese people with the latest iPhone and the best motorbike. Consumerism. It's like a game of whoever dies with the most toys wins. And that's not a game that any of us should be playing. Consumerism has taken over Western culture. And I can tell you now, no object that you own will make you happy. Happiness actually comes, Nepalese culture is correct. It comes from relationships. You know, it comes from meaning. It comes from many other things. It comes from a lot of things that are free. So you'll often see poor people that are still really happy. It's not to say that money wouldn't improve their life. It's to say that happiness doesn't work based on things. For feminism, don't copy the West. Do feminism in your own way. Okay. In the Western world, families are not as close. In Nepal, I hear people say my brother, and that can mean their cousin or their second cousin. In Australia, when I say my brother, I mean my brother. My cousin is not my brother. And what you'll find is as society changes, the family is under threat in Nepal, because this is a trend that has happened in many countries across the world where the government takes over the role of the family. And just the international student pathway, I just see that many Nepalese people who move overseas find this pathway really hard. And so I just encourage you, if you do want to go down that pathway, then do your research. But understand, please, that everything in this is situational. Some bosses in Australia are emotionally immature. Don't disagree with them. Don't give them feedback, right? Some in Nepal are emotionally mature. Then absolutely, you can do that. What I encourage you to do is to decide how to behave in each situation and start a discussion. So, you know, talk to your boss about these concepts. So ask them questions like, if I disagree with you, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? How do you want me to say it, right? And learn professional ways to speak. So, you know, for example, always praise in public, but disagree in private, because then people are far less likely to get defensive. And this is the same in any country. I often, when I'm making a suggestion, I'll say things like, I could be wrong, but I think this may be a good idea. If you like the Western way of thinking, then you're likely to struggle working in a Nepalese bank or in the government. And also, if you have really high ethics, you may struggle working in a bank or government because you may see them doing a lot of things that you don't necessarily agree with. If you are like us, then come and work for us. If you hated everything I said, then don't work for us. Okay, you're not going to be a good cultural fit. We do sponsor some of our staff to come to Australia. They must be culturally intelligent. They must be book smart. So that's like passing tests, doing maths. But they also must be street smart and good with people. And it takes about 5 years, and it's hard. And I know in Nepal, everyone wants to be a manager. And I see that often this is for respect. In Australia, sales actually pays way more than management. So specialists are also paid more than managers. So things are actually flipped. In terms of what does a mortgage broker earn, in Australia, our top mortgage brokers in the last few months have earned about $40,000 a month. That's totally insane. That makes it one of the highest paid positions in the world. And that is for a very high performing broker. In Nepal, we do not pay salaries anywhere near that high. They're in line with the salaries of Nepal. But if you'd like to work for us, you can go to hlenepal.com.np and all the details are there. You can also learn a lot working for us because we involve our staff collaboratively in a lot of the decisions we make. So you learn a lot of the things that you may study at university, you get to put into action. However, most of that learning comes after working with us for about 2 years. So really, we're a long-term position. These are some of our staff in Australia. This is Romy and his wife Anshu, Janish, Mohit and his fiancée Prakash. They've all lived in Australia several years now. They're some of the best mortgage brokers in Australia. They live near the beach, and Romy's learning how to scuba dive, which is pretty cool. So let's do some exercises. I'm going to ask you guys some questions, and I want to see what you think. So let's say a Western manager calls a meeting to discuss a problem. She asks people for their feedback, and they're silent. What do you think's happening? You can type in chat. See.
Can you repeat the question again, Otto? I think.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so let's say a Western manager calls a meeting with some Nepalese staff to discuss a problem. And she asks people for their feedback, and everyone is silent in the meeting. So what do you think is happening? People are not paying attention. Ouch. What else might be happening? Lack of communication skills. That's right. Very high power distance culture. Particularly, the problem might be a problem to do with the company or the manager, and they're afraid to speak about it because they're worried that it may offend people, right? And yes, I would say lack of confidence is also quite likely. How can we solve this problem? How can that Western manager get feedback from the Nepalese people? How can they do that? Interesting. Make them comfortable. Anonymous surveys. So Akriti, that's something that we've been doing at work. And we found that works. Anonymous surveys, people are very comfortable talking. We've also noticed there's a few other situations where Nepalese people will tell me exactly what they think. Number one, if we have a close relationship and it's one-on-one, then they will tell me. Number two, anonymous surveys. Number three, get them drunk. So when our team goes out for dinner and we all get drunk, I guess that's making them comfortable, right? Then they'll tell me exactly what they think. That's great. Thank you, everyone. Let's have a look. Does anyone know how American and British humor are different?
I guess the British humor is little brutal compared with American. Is that true? People have a hard time to understand British humor, but then I had experienced that this back in UK, Otto. And when I try that humor in Nepal, I'm gone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they in the British have something called banter, which is it's being really mean to someone, right? And the Americans don't have banter. Americans take everything you say literally. And so if a British person uses banter with an American, the American person is going to be really offended. Okay. And probably in Nepal, people will be really offended as well. But it's kind of like in Australia and Britain, if you like someone, you're really mean to them, but in a joking way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If
think
you
it's
don't like
also-
someone, then you ignore them.
I think it's also a lot of sarcasm, isn't it?
Lots of sarcasm and something called self-deprecating humor, which is where you laugh at yourself. Yeah. So things like that. All right. So when we talked about those 8 cultural dimensions and we talked about different aspects of Nepalese culture, what is it that can make corruption and nepotism a problem? Feel free, just type in the chat. Is everyone shy? Yeah, not being able to say no. Absolutely. If you can't say no to your boss and you see your boss is doing something bad, what can you do? Potentially lack of accountability, absolutely. What else? There's a couple of other things as well. Yeah, need to respect your senior. Yeah, so it's interesting. Respect, it sounds like such a positive thing, but there is a dark side to respect. Yeah. And it's the same thing with Australia having a flat culture, is that we think it sounds good, everyone's equal, but there's a dark side which is pulling people down, right? So yes, notion of need to help my people first. Yes, so this is to do with the relationships, right? Because it's a relationship-based culture, if you have a relationship with someone, you have to help them. So there's many things there. And also disagreement, that it's hard to disagree. And top-down decision-making, the boss is making the decisions, it's easy for them to take advantage. So all of these things work together to make it easy for corruption and nepotism. And so while these things are in place, it's going to be very hard to change that. And you see in countries that have similar cultural dimensions to Nepal, there's still a lot of corruption and nepotism. Why is it people in Western countries don't realize that they are rich? How can they have no idea, right? Does anyone know? That's right. Akriti, great answers. So being rich is relative, yes. They are only looking at Australia. And even then, they're only looking at a small part of Australia. They've never been to Nepal. They very often haven't been overseas. So they have no idea. They have no idea. Tell me one thing I can improve about my talk. So you can say, sorry, what was that?
That was time management.
Time management. What is
remember the structure we agreed? No, that's a joke. So I was about to tell you.
Yeah. So I took up Sunita's question time.
So I think Nisha is in mind, but there have interestingly enough, the registered participant also asked some questions. So we do have to give them some space.
Sure. Okay. Well, I will then end the talk there and we can move to some questions.
Yes, so I think Sunita and I had prepared some questions. So while we are discussing that, I'd also request others who are here in Zoom to think about questions and put them in the chat box. And of course, for those who are watching us live on Facebook, because we have the platform there as well to put your questions in the comments as well. So I have a first question for Otto. First of all, thanks for the presentation. It reminded me a lot of my experiences. I had the reverse experience, right? Because I was working abroad as a Nepali. One of the struggles I had when I first, I was, in my first job there was that I was expecting a lot of instructions from my boss. So I wanted, them to give me an instruction manual so that I could do everything perfectly. But I didn't really get that. So I struggled a lot. So like you said in one of your slides, the expectation was for me to act like a manager myself and to come up with ideas and of course get results. So it took me a while for me myself to realize that this was what was expected. And I realized that after having a very heart-to-heart conversation with my manager. And the good thing was, what I've seen with, Western workplace culture is that it's very result-oriented. It can be very cutthroat, but the managers are very, very approachable. So I didn't find it very hard to actually talk to my manager and ask about what is it that you really are expecting of me, right? So I wanted to ask you, how has that worked for you in Nepal? So do you find, Nepalese workers here being very approachable, or did you have to do something to adapt yourself here?
I think most of our team in Nepal can see that my way of leading is different to most Nepalese managers. But often new staff are very scared of me. It's something that's really strange to me. And what I see is that some of our team adapt and some of our team do not. And the ones that adapt generally are the ones that end up getting promoted and that have great careers with us. And the people that don't adapt, I can see that they feel frustrated. They're often like, hey, I've been here longer, but that other person got promoted, and they don't seem to understand. And in terms of me adapting to Nepal, for me, I've adapted in probably other ways. So the way I communicate, the way that I seek feedback, the way that I try not to swear, although I'm very, very bad at that. I'm very slow to adapt. Australians swear so much, it's really hard for us to stop. So it's still a journey. I'm still learning. Yeah.
Are there any other challenges that you faced? Because I was also curious, what made you choose Nepal here? Out of all the countries, Asia is a big continent, right? So if you want to enter the Asian market, how did you decide to choose Nepal?
It was luck, actually. So there was no strategy, there was no plan. What happened is I went trekking in Nepal, and while I was here, I met someone really smart, and so I offered them a job. That was it, and it actually worked. And so then we hired more people. And what's something that no one will tell you when you do an MBA or a BBA is that trial and error is actually a really good business strategy. Try something, do a small experiment so you limit your risk. If it works, then do more of it. If it doesn't, then stop. It's very simple.
I think you brought an interesting point about risk, right? How risk averse do you think Nepalese people are?
I think very risk averse. I see, like in Australia, people will quit a job without having a new job. people will just move overseas with no plan. They'll do all sorts of things like that. People often don't save for the future in Australia. And this is because Australia has so many nets that will catch you when you fall, right? In Nepal, you don't have you don't have welfare payments to support you. You don't have, like, if you get sick and go to hospital, it can be really expensive. And so it's a matter of survival to avoid risk in Nepal. What's interesting is things that avoid risk in Nepalese society actually create risk when working for a Western company. For example, avoiding speaking up is a good idea in Nepalese society. If you work for a Western company, you lose respect doing that.
Should I quickly ask something about the, very interesting component of group harmony to Otto?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, Otto, like we said in our earlier discussion, Nishta and I, we are involved in this Globe 2020 research project. It's one of the biggest research project on global leadership and management. And we are involved in our role of co-country investigators on behalf of Nepal. And one of the framework that the project uses is Hofstede Cultural Dimension Framework. And as per the framework, Nepal gets into this collectivist society versus individualistic society.
Yes.
And oftentimes, because it's so easy to understand if you understand where we come from, right? It's easy to understand why we behave certain way, if we understand where we come from. So a quick question. This is also a learning phase for us, for me and Nishta, especially when we came back from UK and USA and started working here at the British College. How important it is for you to maintain the group harmony while making sure that you get the results, while you get the desired output, because that is something that we are really into our learning phase. We definitely want to make the environment as cohesive as possible, but we also want to make sure things get done on time. So what's your experience on this?
Look, that's really hard. That's really hard because it's a trade-off. It's often you can't have one and the other, right? They often don't go together. Now, that being said, in Australia, disagreeing does not damage the relationship. So I think, I don't know personally how I would approach it if I worked in a Nepalese company. But potentially what I would do is I would ask the manager, I would say, here is the problem I'm facing. What do you think I should do? And if you say the problem without the solution, then, whatever the solution they give, if you do that, they can't get you in trouble, right? They suggested it. So, so that's potentially how I would approach it. But I don't know. I would seek their permission to give feedback and to disagree. But I would always do it in private.
Right.
And if someone doesn't do their job, well, this is the thing. I've always been the boss, right? So that's never been a problem for me to solve that.
Absolutely. I mean, somebody has to make the call, right? Especially when you are in a situation like this. And a follow-up question on this, Otto, because like I said, somebody has to make a decision if things do not get on time. You can't always be talking about maintaining the group harmony if things are not getting done, right? Do you think when you try, of course, the way that you feed back to people about their work, their performance, it matters. But do you think when you, in one of your slides, you said that, Australians are too direct, they are very clear in what they communicate, how they communicate, how they feedback. Do you think this type of directness compromise the emotional intelligence in a work environment? Or do you think that's just the opposite way?
It's not really to do with emotional intelligence. It's to do with necessity. So cultures that have a low context generally have very high immigration. So if you come to our office in Sydney, you actually will not see many Caucasian people, okay? So we have people from all over the world. And so when you have multiple cultures working together and they all have their different nuances and ways of communicating, it just doesn't work. And so you need everyone to be very direct. Otherwise, no one understands each other. And so this is the same with the USA. And it's why they're such a low context culture. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But it means that we're going to
Sure.
miss all the hints in your culture. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. I think there is one question in chat, Oro. I will just quickly pick it up. It says it's from Raghav Casey, and he says there are Nepali people in Australia operating business. Do they change to Australian ways, or do they do things like in Nepali?
Yeah, it's a mix. So I see some Nepalese that move to Australia. They adapt very quickly and they figure out how everything works. So much so that I think it's like they were always thinking like an Australian, they just lived in Nepal, right? And then other people, when they move to Australia, they only hang out with Nepalese people. Some people don't improve their English and they're actually very isolated from Australian society. And so it really comes down to the person.
Absolutely. Right. Back to Nishta.
Sure. I have, some, because we are talking about, cultural intelligence here. How can we develop this? Because it's not like IQ, right? It's a bit different. It's difficult to measure it. How do you develop cultural intelligence?
I think a good way is to start a discussion. So you probably have some people that you work with that are from Britain. And, using this talk, you can discuss some of these things with them and then ask them, what are the common problems you have with Nepalese people when you're working with Nepalese people? And then you talk about those situations and you tell them what's happening, what the Nepalese people are thinking in that situation and why they're behaving. And they tell you what they're thinking and why they're behaving that way. And then you understand each other. So it's kind of like you have one piece of the puzzle, they have the other piece. And so you need to be brave and have that open communication. And you know what? It's probably going to be really funny because you're seeing the same thing in just different ways.
How important do you think? I know because we tend to teach about managing diversity, and we talk about this in our management classes as well, right? But when you talk about cultural intelligence, exposure is required, isn't it? So what would you suggest Nepalese in Nepal? How can they develop this?
Yeah, I found, so for a lot of our team in Nepal, we give them a copy of some Australian TV shows that they may like to watch. And we have a range of different shows. And so there's something for everyone. And they very quickly see a different side of Australian culture. And so that's a really good way. So we've all learned a bit of United States culture because we get so much of their TV, right? Whereas for England and Australia, people don't know as much.
Okay, just wanted to see if we have any questions here. I'm not sure I completely understand, but is there a practical way to have a balance between self-awareness and relationship? I'm thinking about, this is about cross-cultural relationship.
Yeah. So I think that was a comment in regards to the previous question. So I don't think it's a question. Yeah.
Right. I can move on to another important point that I really try hard to communicate here as a module leader to the student and to people who I work with, Oro. The whole essence of accountability and ownership. How easy was it for you to communicate here in for Nepali staff? I'm guessing that it was relatively easy for you to communicate about this to people working in Australian office. But what about Nepal? Sometimes I do struggle. We do struggle to make it understand and to communicate the message about when the task is given. You own it.
Yeah.
But that basically means you own it to produce the result that has been asked from you,
Yeah.
right? So, and what's your experience on this? How do you, what type of tips that you would like to offer to all of us who are struggling on here?
Yeah, so I can see people who take accountability and people who avoid accountability. And this is something that it doesn't seem to matter how much I communicate. Some people get it, some people don't. And so it's very simple. We promote people who get it and we don't if they don't. And it is also taken into account when people are given a raise in salary. Because let me just be as blunt as an Australian can be. Results pay the bills, right? It makes sense. If you are a salesman and you sell nothing, then the company earns no revenue. Why would they give you a raise? So in Nepal, to me, it's so strange that there's a disconnect between results and things like promotions and salaries and things like that. That's crazy, right? It's not sustainable. And I don't know, some people don't seem to understand this. What I see is that they're trying to avoid getting in trouble, right? But in our culture, it's avoiding getting in trouble gets you in trouble. Does that make sense? Whereas discussing mistakes and learning, you do better. So yeah, it is a challenging one.
Indeed, and I'm sure I'm only referring it to our diverse experience in other countries and here in Nepal. I'm sure it's the same case with other countries in different contexts as well. This seems to be a international struggle for all of us. There is a question from Anish in chat. He's asking, how do you keep your work-life balance? And when are you coming to Nepal, Uru?
I'll be in Nepal in about 1 month, and I'll be staying for a month, and I cannot wait. I'm going to go do the Annapurna circuit again, and I'm going to eat lots of delicious momos and some wol, bara, sapumicha, and all the good food. But how do I keep a work-life balance? So you know how we in Australia, we're very results focused. One thing that we do really, really well that I see that in Nepal people do not understand as well is that what you focus on matters way more than how you do it. Okay? So for example, let's say I'm a mortgage broker and I'm giving people home loans or mortgages. Let's say that I sit down with someone who wants a loan and I spend 1 hour with them. Then that's an effective way to spend my time. But let's say instead I give a speech to 100 people. Same 1 hour, 100 times the result. So Australians really, because of that results focused, it forces us to innovate and try new things and do things differently. And so that's one of the things that really helps with a work-life balance is I eliminate work that is not effective. I just don't do it. I choose not to do it. Secondly, I delegate areas of responsibility rather than tasks. If I say, to someone, please do this, I have to keep saying that. But if I say, you are accountable for this, then they will do that on their own and they will solve all the problems. And that's much easier. And that frees me up then to do other things.
True. I think delegation is also something that we Nepalese have to understand, right? Sometimes sometimes we get so emotional about doing things by ourselves and having less trust about the type of outcome that people would produce, and then we forget to dedicate, and we make our life little hard. That is something
Yes.
that is a learning, component for us. Right, Odo, we are about to wrap up the session. It's 9:47 a.m. here in Nepal. Our session is till 10. What we will do is, I checked if there are any questions in Facebook. There are none. So we have covered, Nishta, have we covered the questions from the participant and from ourselves? Is there anything pending from your side?
Not really. I just wanted to, because, we are almost out of time, just, wanted to ask Otto one last thing before we wrap up. Because we're talking about, of course, we are living in a day and age where we cannot now avoid, I think, working in a cross-cultural environment. And we keep talking about challenges and, adaptability, which is important. But what has been very rewarding for you? I'm sure there's been a lot of things that we learn, a lot of benefits of being in that setting. So what has been very rewarding for you?
Yeah, for me, starting my business in Nepal was one of the best things that ever happened in my life. I've made so many new friends. I have learned to see the world in a different way, and I'm a different person. Many people in the West believe that their culture is superior. And I know that many young people in Nepal believe that they idolize certain aspects of Western culture. But what I can tell you is this: there are many, many great things in Nepalese culture that we don't have in Australia. We don't have many traditions. And so we don't feel that connected to our culture. We're not that close to our families. And we're not that kind compared to you. So there's a lot we can learn from you. So please, what I encourage you is, if you can look at Nepal the way a foreigner does, not just will you see different problems, but you'll see different things to appreciate as well.
All right, thank you so much, Otto. Sunita, you wanted to talk about
Yeah,
something.
I actually wanted to request Odo, a summary message. And I think he just gave the one.
I think I just gave it, but Sunita, you've lived overseas. I just wanted to understand what it was like when you returned back to Nepal.
I think that is the conversation over drink, Odo. But
Okay.
I can share some of my experience. Like we told you in other meeting, Nishta and I had a little bit of a cultural differences here when we actually came back to Nepal to work. Because we got really lucky to got chance to work with the type of managers back in UK and USA who were really of a mentor, and we're very approachable and accessible every time we used to work. And the work culture that I received, throughout my career, was all about the results, ownership, and accountability. That was something that I struggled here in Nepal. But like I said, as much as I personally focused on the results when I came back with my learnings, I also realized the importance of maintaining the group harmony. I think that is something that I overlooked, that is something
Yes.
that I didn't give much attention to, but I'm learning to give a space how important it is to maintain the group harmony, and, basically trying to understand how important it is to know to know the people in your network to get things
Yes.
done here. Things are
Yes.
different, so we might as well adapt. So these are the things that I learned here, Odo, and I think we are all in this learning curve. Things are going to be changed, especially post COVID. The entire aspect and the idea of people management looks like it's going to be completely different post pandemic. I'm sure things have been the same while you try to manage people here in HLE Nepal during pandemic. Similar experience here with us, by managing the student and faculties and even ourselves during pandemic and post-pandemic. So I think I'm just looking for a lot of changes from now on. And like you said, if we are not ready to adapt, then we're just out of the game. We will try and see ways around to find the contextual ways of working by making sure things get done. That's most important.
And I'm guessing that work from home and study from home was a major challenge for Nepalese culture because it's all about relationships.
Yep, true,
Yeah.
true. In fact, I mean, during that, well, I hope we don't have to face another lockdown and another situation from now on, but you never know, right? Anything can
Yeah.
happen at any time. And
Yeah.
I actually, all of us here at the management, we were absolutely surprised how well the students here and the faculties got adapted, when we switched our classes and the settings from offline to online. And that was quite something for us. And I am equally aware, as much as we were very quick and adapt in the British college environment, I am aware that there are a lot of schools and colleges overall in Nepal, because of the digital divide, their academic continuity got affected, and they were not really adapting to the situation, and that was a challenge. So it's not really, easy, as we can see from the British college lens. But like I said, we don't really have an option, do we?
Yeah.
Other than adapting and other than making ourselves prepared. So
And
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how going through COVID has changed Nepalese culture. As I know, I can see it's changed Australia. Not the same country coming out that you were going in. So
absolutely.
hopefully there are some beneficial changes as well.
True. Any final words, Oro? Just thank you so much for making your time available to have this session with us. I know we were speaking back and forth, to have this session, and finally we had this wonderful session today. And I'm sure all our students, I can see a lot of our students have joined here in Zoom, and there's a lot of people watching us in Facebook Live, and the recordings will also be available in Facebook to those who are interested to go through it and share with your friends and families again. So to wrap it up, Oro, if you have any, core message that you would like us to take away after this session.
Yeah, just you are the next generation, and I encourage you to combine Nepalese culture and other cultures to work out what is best for yourself and the situation, and to be culturally intelligent both in Nepal and elsewhere. And best of luck with your career.
Great. Thank you so much, Oro. Thank you so much. And you have a great day ahead. I see you when I see you, whenever you are in Nepal, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much, Oro. Have a great day
ahead.
Thank
you, Sunita.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Again, would like to thank Otto, thank Sunita, and thank everybody for joining us here today. And of course, like Sunita said, this video will be available in our British College Facebook page if you want to watch it again. All right, then that leads us to the end of today's session. Have a very good rest of the day. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.